Hey everyone, welcome back to another video from A Man Talks NRL SuperCoach. Today we are going through the round 8 preview, or the trade targets. I will call this one. This one's going to be looking a little bit different to my previous videos. I didn't manage to get out a Teamless Tuesday and Captains video, so I'm going to be talking about that in this one, as well as the general trade targets. So hopefully you guys enjoy it. If you do, would really appreciate a thumbs up, and do please consider subscribing to the channel if you haven't already, as I'll be continuing to put out more videos like this throughout the 2021 SuperCoach season. My goal is still to get to 1,000 by end of the season, but if we can hit 1,000 by State of Origin Game 1, that would be really amazing, and I really appreciate the support from you guys so far this year. But enough of that, let's get straight into the video. So firstly, quick shout out to Benny's Lads, or Ben, for getting a monster 1,433 last week. Top scoring in our overall group league. I know his trades were pretty bold. I think he went for a Teddy and Pappenhausen to Turbo and Gutherson move, which really paid off for him last week, and hopefully this week that should carry him well moving forward. And our overall top 5, we've got James, Thomas, Stuart, Eric, and Paul, who've all been there, kind of some repetitive names. They're continuing to have good seasons, all sitting in the top 800, and James is sitting at 116, so hopefully he can push into the top 100 this round. I didn't have such a great week myself. I captained Tedesco, which didn't work out for me. Scored 1,193, so I think I'm about 12th now. But now we'll get into a bit of a snapshot into the team lists. So I just wanted to quickly put together a bit of a snapshot on the Team List Tuesday and the real talking points. I tried to just pick out anything that was really relevant, not just go through every team. And if you guys do prefer this kind of format, let me know. Still kind of trying to experiment with the videos and the format. This was a bit more of a necessity. I wasn't able to put out the video on Team List Tuesday specifically, so I had to wrap a bit of a shorter summary together. But Jordan Ricky is starting for the Broncos, which is kind of crucial, given that I think when he was named to the bench, a lot of people were selling him, and for good reason. But Alex Glenn is looking, I think, to be out for about a month. So if you still have held on to Ricky at this point, potentially he might still get a few more cash rises out of him. But I don't think there's any necessary means to hold him, even though he's starting. He's not really pumping out the scores that we want to see. For the Panthers, Api Coruscant has returned at number 9, which is really, really big news. He just throws into the mix another number to play in the round 13 bye week, and the hooker position is already stacked in terms of that specific criteria, so this will just give us some more headaches. But yet he's got a pretty high break even, so definitely don't have to bring him in straight away, but definitely someone to keep an eye on and see how he goes moving forward as he returns back from his injury. On the Eels side, Ryan Madison has returned to the 17, but he is making his way from the interchange. So Isaiah Papali'i actually still has his starting role this week. So good news for any Papali'i owners. Definitely something to keep an eye on in terms of Madison's minutes and how he just comes back into the game as in general. One thing I guess I would probably note is that, pre-game, just keep an eye on the team lists that get announced an hour before kickoff. Madison potentially might get swung into the starting lineup. We'll have to wait and see. Hayes Dunster is actually named on the not on the extended bench. He is named on the bench in, I think, number 16. He was a preseason bit of a center wing cheapie, so he's 173k. You can get him in your center wing. No real need to obviously bring him in straight away this week. This is just his first game, but definitely someone to also keep an eye on. He might potentially be a handy number if he does continue a place in the Parramatta squad in terms of covering round 13 bye week. For the Roosters, Siosio Takiaho has been named to play this week after missing last week, but he makes his way off the bench, which is a bit of a concern given that his minutes probably going to be down and his overall point scoring will be down too, but I will discuss what to do with him in the next little sections. And James Tedesco, I think, is the big news. He's named at number 1, but I have some doubts whether he'll play, so that's definitely something to keep an eye on as well, if he's going to be named or not, or if he's going to play this week. On the Warriors side, some big notable things here. Tohu Harris has returned back to the 17 and makes his way at starting lock. So that's good news for anyone who did pick him up last week. He was just ruled out for some concussion symptoms, but he seems to be all good to go. David Fusatua makes his way back onto the wing as well for the Warriors. And Josh Curran, who was originally suspended, he has been able to downgrade his charge, and he is free to play. So that definitely does cause some extra headaches in terms of trades, because he's looking like a real good cheapie. On the Cowboys, Jason Taumalolo makes his way back into the starting number 13. So big news for them. They've actually, they've won 3 in a row, looking pretty decent. He would only help their team. So really keen to see how he performs in his comeback. For the Dragons, Ben Hunt comes back at number 7 for the Dragons, so big inclusion for them. Obviously, a lot of shuffling in their backline with Michaela Ravalawa and Jordan Pereira both getting suspensions. That sees Max Feagai, another preseason centre wing cheapie, make his way onto the wing for the Dragons. So again, similar to Dunster, just keep an eye on him, see how he goes, and see, I would expect him to be in the team for as long as one of these two wingers is out. So Ravalawa was supposed to be out for 2 games and Pereira for 3. So we might be able to get maybe one price rise out of Figai, but definitely someone to keep an eye on. He also could potentially be a handy number to play in the round 13 bye week. So those are the kind of notable ins or startings or benchings. In terms of the outs, for the Raiders, we had Josh Papali'i dropped out of the 17 altogether due to rest. I'm not sure if that's rest or if he's dropped. Who knows? But yeah, quite interesting. And obviously he's a super popular front row forward, but he just hasn't been delivering so far. So definitely looks a sell at this point. And Jared Croker's also out. And so that caused a bit of a reshuffling with the Raiders backline. And Bailey Simpson, I haven't mentioned him specifically in this list, but he is also named to return on the wing for the Raiders. Teague Wilton from the Sharks, he has been named on the bench because they have had some troops come back in terms of Aiden Tolman and Wade Graham. So he's made his way into the bench. I think his break even is still around the low 20s, or low to high 20s, so he still potentially has one more cash rise in him, but he has probably done his job. He's made quite a bit of coin for any owners, and so he looks a sell if his role on the bench continues. For the Storm, obviously the big news here is Ryan Papenhuyzen again hasn't been named, and it has come out from Bellamy that he might be another 2 to 3 weeks potentially. So I think if you did hold him last week, I think given the kind of guidance we've been given, I think he's still probably a sell this week as well. And if you sold him last week like I did, I think that was the decision has been vindicated basically. Again for the Storm, Nelson Asafa-Solomona and George Jennings both suffering from concussion symptoms, so they were also ruled out this week. So they're a little bit more reshuffling at the Storm. But I thought this was a good summary of the kind of key ins and outs for Teamless Tuesday. But let me know, guys, if you kind of prefer this little shorter wrap up of that. So I think the biggest question coming into this round will again be on the fullbacks, similar to what we had last week. So I put there the question was what to do with Teddy. Look, if I had to be super straightforward, if Teddy is named and is playing this week, I think I'm going to hold. If he's an out, he's a sell. That's just how I'll see it. The reason I say that is if he's playing, yes, his break even is extremely high, 157, and his point scoring has been pretty poor even before he had that concussion, right? So he's, it's 590k. He's dropped a stack load of cash. I think that's about 250k. So if you do sell, that is a lot of coin that you are losing. The benefit, I think, to holding him is that it saves a trade, I guess, and trades are very precious. Like me, myself, I've only been able to save one trade up until this point, and that really does become crucial. I think we saw last year definitely that in the back end of the season, we see injuries obviously injuries and suspensions have happened thick and fast already, but towards the end of the season we have to be able to plan for that, but also just players typically get rested from the big clubs, i.e. also the big Supercoach players, as the coaches rest their players and manage their minutes in the lead up to finals. We saw that with the Storm last year. They caused carnage in the last round of the season, basically naming a new 17. We've seen the Roosters obviously very cautious with their big gun players. So I think saving the trades is really crucial if you can. So really need to assess the worth of trading out these guys. So obviously I'm kind of a big Teddy, fanboy. If anyone, has been watching this channel consistently, and I'm a Roosters fan, so I love watching the guy. The draw for the Roosters coming up is pretty good. The Knights, the Eels are kind of tough, but then Cowboys and Broncos are following that. Really good games that you'd probably want to be owning someone like James Tedesco. So for me, if he's playing, I think I'm probably going to hold. Obviously, I'll just have to cop the cash loss, and if you don't sell him, he's obviously not going to lose you the money. You only realize that when you sell. So that's the reason for why I would probably argue to hold if he is playing this week. But if he is not named, that's too much money, I think, to be leaving on your bench. And we've seen this season so far that the fullback spot is really where you need 2 premium guys who can deliver big points. So if he's a sell, then the question comes to who would you sell to. So that is kind of also dependent, I guess, on, what your trades were last week. So for example, last week I traded Ryan Papenhuyzen to Clint Gutherson. The reason I went for Gutherson was he had a good draw. He was coming up against the Broncos last week and then the Bulldogs this week. So two very good games. He had a relatively low break even, and he's probably likely to play in the round 13 bye week, in my opinion. I think there's too many guys ahead of him in terms of origin selection, but again, that's a bit of an unknown quantity, so it is a slight risk. But that was the reason why I went with Clint Gutherson, and he delivered well. He got 124 points last week. In terms of his draw, as I mentioned, Bulldogs this week. Roosters, obviously a tough game, although I do think the Roosters as a game for the attacking players is a little bit better than probably what it was that we thought at the beginning of the season. And then he comes into the Warriors and the Sea Eagles. So again, 2 pretty decent games. So I'm very comfortable owning Gutherson, and that was the main reason why I brought him in, and still relatively a pod, 8% owned. The big trade that I've seen is also James Tedesco to Tom Trbojevic. Now, if I had to choose between Tom Trbojevic and Gutherson, I went Gutherson last week, obviously, so I'm a little bit biased in that. Obviously, this week I'd go for Tavojevic because I don't have him. But I think if you didn't have either, I'd probably go for Tavojevic. Look, Gutherson has gone up to 687k. Tavojevic is at 593k, so he hasn't changed in price yet, and he's got a negative 18 break even. So he'll go up by about 50k probably this week. It is a tough game against the Panthers though, so definitely would kind of quell expectations as to how many points he's going to score this week. I think Ponga's 58 last week against the Panthers was the highest fullback score so far this season against them. So I wouldn't be expecting like a big 100+ game. Obviously, he definitely has that capability in him. He's an absolute gun. But yeah, that's probably something to keep in mind. But then the games coming up after the Panthers is very good for the Sea Eagles as well. The Warriors and the Broncos, and then the Eagles, which is kind of tough. But those Warriors and Broncos games, very, very good. So he's very, very highly owned after last week's trades, 24%. Based on the kind of calculations that I've seen in the SuperCoach app, it looks like he's probably going to go up by another 10% based on the amount of people doing the Tedesco to Turbo trade. And it's a fully justifiable one. You actually have to pay an extra 3k now to go from Teddy to Turbo. But yeah, that's kind of my thinking of if you were selling Tedesco, I think Tavojevic is probably the obvious one, and probably for good reason. He's got that negative break even, decent draw after the Panthers, and he's just looking amazing. Kalyn Ponga, I do want to speak about him as well though. Bit of more of the pod fullback, 730k, so he's definitely much more expensive than your Guthersons and your Tavojevic's, but 4% owned, so he definitely has that pod factor, and a break even of 44, which he probably will meet. So he's probably actually likely to either hover around his price or even go up just a little bit. What I do like about Ponga is mainly that he's got that goal kicking, which really does boost up his ceiling. We saw just against the Sharks, he got a massive 163. His floor is pretty good, 58 against the Panthers. I think really, really good game from him in that. Well, he didn't seem like he could do much in the actual game itself, and he still came away with about a 60. Which is really what you want. Obviously, you want from your fullback a little bit more than that, but at least that the floor is not too low. Roosters is a bit of a tough game this week, but as I mentioned, I think that game is a little bit better on paper. And then the Raiders, I think, also on paper, that looks a bit of a tough game, but I think the Raiders have been conceding a lot of points recently, especially in second halves. We saw Val Holmes score 90+ against them just last week, so I think Ponga is obviously probably in a better class of fullback than Val Holmes, in my opinion. So I think, I don't think that draw is as tough now as what people were thinking. It's probably only really the Roosters this week that you might have to cop another poor game. But Raiders, I think, is a good game. And then he comes into the Tigers and then the Cowboys. And in round 12, the Knights versus Sea Eagles. So Tom Tavojevic and Ponga would be versing each other. Obviously, he does play Origin, but I also think Turbo plays Origin, so that's something to consider with these guys. I mentioned obviously Gutherson won't, so that's something that works in Gutho's favour. But Ponga, I think his draw is actually pretty good, and he could be a real good pod factor. If money's not a concern for you, you can actually fork out the money. I probably would go Ponga over Tavojevic. He doesn't have as much of an injury concern. Obviously, he just came back from a shoulder injury, I guess. So yeah, I think Turbo will be the more popular move, given that he's got that discounted price and it hasn't gone up in price yet, versus Ponga, who's quite expensive. But I think the Ponga trade-in is still good, and I really think people might be overstating that draw. I know definitely I probably was last week, but I think based on how the Raiders are performing, I think we can kind of consider that maybe a little bit easier now. I put Matt Duffy here, bit of a pod fullback, so definitely a pod, 1% owned, 620k, so it is very expensive, and I can completely understand, it might not be the most appealing trade in, given that Tom Tavojevic, who's looked amazing, is cheaper than him. But Duffy, he's got a really good draw coming up, and obviously he's got that real big pod factor. So he's got the Tigers and the Bulldogs in the next 2 weeks, which is great. Storm, yuck, tough game. No, don't expect any good points there. Then it's the Sharks after that, and I'm pretty sure in round 12 he versus the Tigers again, and he does play in the round 13 bye week. So got a lot of factors going for him in terms of his draw, but his price really isn't that good. His break-even is 99, so he might actually go down again in price just a bit. And I feel like he probably doesn't have quite the upside of these these other 5 that I've got on this list here. So definitely, if you really want to go left of field and go with the Duffy, I think you've got a lot of good factors going for him. Personally, I wouldn't go there myself. I think there's too many other good players in this position, but I think Duffy is still a really, really interesting pod player. So the next kind of talking point I wanted to address was the front row forwards. I kind of spoke a little bit more in depth about this last week, but I still think it's relevant, mainly for 2 reasons. I think Tino Fa'asuamaleaui, who I've still got in my team, is probably hanging around in a lot of other people's teams. He's still suspended for 1 more week, and even when he comes back next week, he's got a really, really high break, even at 112, and he just hasn't really shown the capability yet to be a season-long keeper. And Takiaho, I think I have seen a few people mention about selling him, given that he has been named on the bench and his minutes are probably going to be down this week. His points are therefore probably going to be down. I'll give my opinion on Takiaho, whether he's a sell or not. For me, I don't think he's a sell. I think the fact that he missed last week and is coming off the bench this week shows that obviously they are managing that rib injury. But I think that means that they're showing how cautious they are with their players. But I still think that means when they do name him back in the 13, they'll name him back when he's fit and firing to go. And before he had that injury, his lowest score I think was around 64, and he's averaging around 70. The front row forward position really has been a bit of a desert in terms of player options who are scoring well. Takiaho is one of the guys who has been doing really well. I had him from the start of the season. I wanted his goal kicking upside, and he's been really consistent. I think for me, if I trade him out, I'll probably want him back later at some stage. Obviously, he doesn't play in the round 13 bye week, but I look at him as a season-long hold. If I've got both Takiaho and Tino, I would 100% be prioritizing trading out Tino. Even though Tino's not going to change in price and Takiaho is probably going to go down because he's not going to be playing as many minutes and his points will be down, I think I just look at it simply like, well, Takiaho is probably someone I'm going to have as a season keeper. Tino, probably not. So Tino for me is the one who has to make way instead of Takiaho. I think whether you play Takiaho in your 17 is a different question. At the moment, I've got him in my starting 17 purely just based on the fact that if he comes on and plays maybe half an hour, he might get 25, 30 points, maybe if he does goal kick, he might get up to 40. Which is probably similar to what your replacement front row forward would be, if you're playing like a Stefano or Takamanu or something. So Takiaho for me is probably still okay to play in the 17, but I wouldn't expect, those 60 plus scores. Now, in terms of the options who I think to replace like your Tinos in the front row forward position, I think I've narrowed it down to the 4 key guys that a lot of people would be talking about. Isaiah Papali'i, 699k has gone up again so much in price, and his break-even is still very manageable at 42. I think the ship has sailed on him though. He will obviously score. He's probably likely to score another try, to be honest, against the Bulldogs. He's been scoring tries for fun in the recent weeks. But I think paying 700k for him is absolute top dollar, and I think it's just too much expense, especially with Ryan Madison now named on the bench. He's made his way back into the 17. Obviously, Papali'i is starting this week, but I still think that from next week onwards, Madison's probably going to be coming back into the starting lineup, and Papali'i will go back to the bench. I think it's been talked about that he prefers playing in the middle rotation, and Brad Arthur has also stated that. So I would fully expect that, when Madison's back to full fitness, Papali'i goes back to the kind of 50 to 55 minutes, which he still is probably going to pump out 50 to 55. So very, very good scores, to be honest. But yeah, I just think, it's too much money, I think, at the moment to be paying for him. But if you have him, you continue to hold, he will play the round 13 bye week. The next option will be Payne Haas, 618k. Everyone knows that he's the number one front row forward probably in the past few seasons. And he's killing it at the moment. He's averaging 69. He's got a big 78 points last week, which did include a line break. But his minutes are pretty decent. He's averaging about 64 minutes a game. I guess the thing with him is that his break even is 83, so it's still relatively high. But as we saw last week, he's very, very close to kind of getting that anyway in his game. And I think the thing with Payne Haas is I think I would go for him is if your mentality is kind of like, I just want to lock into my front row forward, a set and forget guy. I'm just going to get him in. He probably won't play in the round 13 bye week because he's probably going to play Origin, but you just ignore that and you're like, what? I'm just going to lock in that number one front row forward, set and forget. I don't have to worry about it for the rest of the season unless he gets injured or suspended. That's the kind of mentality I would probably be thinking if you were to go with like a Payne Haas. In comparison, you've got Tavita Pangai Jr., his club mate, who's about 100k cheaper, 526k. He's a little bit more owned, but I would imagine that ownership is going to go up for Tavita Pangai Jr., given that he's got a big 100 points last week. I mentioned last week that I think if you're going for a Tavita Pangai, you really are going for the upside play, and he showed that last week, And the Broncos draw is actually not too bad coming up in the next few weeks. So I think there is that potential for attacking stats for Tavita Pangai Jr. He will play the round 13 bye week. I don't think he should be playing Origin, but there has been some talk potentially he might be a bit of a bolter for it. But yeah, his break even is 33. So I think very, very achievable. He's probably going to go up again a little bit in price. And he's averaging very similar to Payne Haas. So I think, to be honest, if I had to choose between Haas and TPJ, I would probably go for TPJ at this point in time, given that he's probably going to play in that round 13 bye week, which is really, really important. And he's got that upside, and he is about 100k cheaper. So I think for that reason, I'd go with Tavita Pangai Jr., kind of ruining a little bit that I didn't get him in last week. Obviously, I would have been able to benefit from his big score and not have to worry about bringing him in. But yeah, Tavita Pangai Jr. versus Haas, I think I'd go for TPJ, looking more to short to medium term. If you ask me long term though, in terms of which of the two I'd want for the rest of the season, I would go with Haas. So I guess it depends what kind of preference you have in that. And Luke Thompson, again, probably maybe the third best option here. I probably won't really consider Papali'i at this point. At 452k, he's doing pretty well, averaging 71. I think he scored about 65 last week, and his minutes have been pretty decent, about 57, and I think he gets about 50 to 55 in base per week anyway. So basically, for as many minutes as he plays, he'll score he'll score 1 in PPM, and just throw in a couple of tackle breaks, maybe an offload, and he'll probably bump up his average to around that 60 to 65, which is really, really solid from your front row forward. So I think if you're looking for a kind of no-nonsense, just kind of lock that kind of point-scoring range in your front row forward, I think he's still a decent buy. I guess I would note that his minutes have been up a little bit in the past few weeks, given that Josh Jackson has been out of the side, and obviously Jack Hetherington is sitting on the sidelines with a long suspension. So something to keep in mind. He won't play in round 13, which really works against him, versus like Tavita Pangai Jr. who does. So definitely would be prioritizing TPJ over Luke Thompson. But if your team is looking pretty decent at the moment for round 13 buy players, you could go with the Thompson if you're looking to save a little bit of money. Now, the next kind of section I wanted to go through was the cheapies. There's a few very relevant cheapies this week. The two main ones will be Jake Simpkin and Josh Curran. So Jake Simpkin, 173k. You can only get him at the hooker position. He's been averaging 51, basically all in tackles. He hasn't really made any attacking stats at this point in time. He's got a negative 38 break even, so he'll go up a stack load in cash. And then you've got Josh Curran, 203k. He's listed at second row forward. He's averaging 66 with a minus 58 break even. Now the question is, I think a lot of people would probably want to be getting at least one of these two guys, if not both. Josh Curran has been, his chart has been downgraded, so he is available to play from this week onwards. So you definitely want to be jumping on either of these two guys for their first price rise, because this will be their third game that they're playing. So I'll give my thoughts on Simpkin first. I guess most people, if you've got guys like, if you've still got like a Jacob Little, like a Matt Moylan in your 5-8, and you can switch via Connor Watson, Moylan to Simpkin, Little to Simpkin, easy move. I would 100% be doing it. If you're like me, and I think a lot of people might be in the same position, you've got Connor Watson in your hooker position, and you've got Josh Schuster at 5'8". Which of the two would you sell, or would you even sell, if that? I think I did mention last week, I'd probably go Schuster to Simpkin purely for the buy 13 coverage that Simpkin offers that Schuster won't. But in the past couple of weeks, seeing how Schuster has been playing, and especially with Turbo coming back into the team, Schuster plays on the left edge, and obviously Turbo goes both sides, but I think playing on an edge really, really helps Schuster. He's shown his own capability to bust tackles, create try assists, get line breaks and stuff. I think Schuster, to me, he's a safe play in your 17, and I just can't justify trading him at this point in time. He's performing so well. He's got like a break even of 3, so I think he'll go up a lot in price. So Schuster, for me, I don't think I can trade. So really it comes down to, do I trade Connor Watson? Connor Watson's probably peaked in price. He's 473k, I believe. And I think his break even is around kind of what he's averaging. So I wouldn't expect any real cash rises out of Connor Watson. For me, Connor Watson to Simpkin, I think if you're looking to free up a lot of cash, obviously that trade will enable it. And if you haven't really nailed a lot of your other cheapies, so say for example you didn't get on like a Teague Wilton, your Ben Condon, or you didn't get on like a Schuster, and you're really, really looking to generate cash, I think Connor Watson to Simpkin is a good move. Jake Simpkin is probably going to be averaging a little bit under Connor Watson, but that trade creates a lot of money, and Simpkin will go up in value by quite a bit as well. And for Simpkin, there's no sign of Jacob Little on the extended bench or in the 17. I think Jacob Little is in potentially the reserves, but not in the 17. So Simpkin is probably going to be set to play another big 70 to 80 minutes, kind of what he's averaging so far this season. So I think his position is still looking relatively secure. But for me, Connor Watson to Simpkin, at least for this week, I think I've got other trades that I want to prioritize. I think I'll be, based on the Teddy news, if Teddy is out, that's automatically going to be a trade. And then it comes down to whether I want to get Simpkin or Josh Curran. I think Josh Curran is actually the better cheapie this week. For me, like getting your second row forward cheapies, I think there's a lot of guys who, are kind of plodding around in the second row forward who are not doing super well. Like your Ryan James, if you've got the right duels, you can go from like a Stefano Oitokumanu or Spencer Leniu. And even if you have a cheap center wing and you've got the right second row forward duels, your Charlie Staines, your Bailey Simonsons, your David Fusituas, these are guys that I have that I think are much better trade outs than a Connor Watson. I can make trade outs for all those guys that I just mentioned to Josh Curran, free up a little bit of coin and jump on Curran's price rise. And he's looking really good, averaging 66, and he's averaging like 55 in base, which is like Tohu Harris levels of base. And his position is looking pretty secure at the moment. He's performed really well in his first 2 games, really like what I've seen out of him. So definitely I think of these 2, if you're only going for one, at least in my own circumstances, I'm going for Josh Curran. I think Simpkin I'm actually going to be skipping this week. Now, Schuster probably will go up in price just as much maybe as Simpkin, so if anything happens, I can maybe do Schuster to Simpkin, but I think Simpkin for me, I'm just going to have to skip at this point in time. I think Connor Watson is still doing relatively well, averaging around 50 to 55. Simpkin I don't see are averaging much better. And with the Knights draw, as I touched on with Ponga, I think it's after the Roosters game, it's going to be looking a little bit better. I think Lachlan Fitzgibbon is potentially a question mark on Connor Watson's minutes as to, how many minutes Watson's going to play. But I think Fitzgibbon is kind of being eased back. He's playing in the reserve grade, I think, to get his minutes and his match fitness back up. But either way, Barnett has been killing it so far. And on the edge, Frizzell is not going anywhere. He's an 80-minute back rower. And Connor Watson has been doing very, very well at lock. So I don't really see even how Fitzgibbon is going to get back into that starting lineup. He might eat into Watson's minutes a little bit, but I think Watson has shown he's got that really good upside. So I think Watson, for me, I still want to hold up until probably round 13. So barring any injuries or suspensions, Simpkin's going to be a skip for me, but I'll be going for Josh Curran, I think, this week. Whether I do maybe a Tino to Josh Curran, or I do maybe not Ryan James, he might have one more cash rise in him, and Ben Condon, who I think a lot of people might have jumped on. He's got a negative break even, I still believe. So he'll probably go up in price. So I don't think I'll be going Ben Condon to Josh Curran. But if you've got like a Teague Wilton to Josh Curran, that makes perfect sense, given that Wilton's been named on the bench. And like me, if you can flip it, I can do like a Charlie Staines down to Josh Curran. Obviously, that doesn't help in terms of my buy player numbers, but Charlie Staines hasn't been doing that well anyway. So Josh Curran for me is looking a great trade-in target, and I'd pick him of the 2. Some other guys, I'll quickly touch on Max Figai and Hayes Dunster. Kind of spoke about them already in Teamless Tuesday. 2 cheap center wing options, but just keep an eye on these guys and see how they perform. This is only their first game, so there's no need to jump with them at this point in time. Nico Hines at 296k. I don't know if he's a real genuine cheapie, but he does have center wing and fullback dual flexibility, which really does come in handy. And with Pappenhausen out of the side, he's going to be playing at the number 1 position, or the fullback spot for the Melbourne Storm. Now, his break even is -5, so he will go up in value quite a bit. And theoretically, if he plays, this week and next week, he'll be getting 2 full games at 80, and he's shown that he can score big when he plays full 80 minutes. The problem with him though is that he will become an auto emergency nightmare in terms of the low scores that he's going to get when Pappenhausen is back in the team. Because in the games that he played off the bench when Pappenhausen was in the starting lineup, he played 28 minutes, 9 minutes, and 23 minutes. So very, very low, and his scores are very low at that point in time. So I don't think I'd be going on Nico Hines as like a value buy, in terms of your cash rises. You probably get a few out of him. But if you're looking to kind of get into the points, again, if you're looking to create money, you can go Teddy to Nico Hines or something, or even if one of your center wings, if you got like a Charlie Staines, you can downgrade him to Nico Hines. He'll probably score pretty well in the next couple of rounds. But just keep in mind that when Pappenhausen is fit and healthy, he's going straight back in at number 1, and Hines is probably either going to be in the on the bench or out of the side altogether. So I think if you're looking for a short-term player, you can go with Nico Hines, but I think there is a bit of risk, and I won't be doing it myself. Now, the last part of this kind of round preview, I'll go through the vice captain and the captain candidates. Now, with the Raiders versus the Raptors on Thursday night, I think Cody Walker becomes a very easy vice captain selection. He scored 68 last week and looked really, really good playing at fullback. And the Raiders have shown that they concede a lot of points to fullbacks. Val Holmes scored 97 against them last week. 6th worst team they've been in terms of conceding points to fullbacks. So Cody Walker, I think, could have a really good game. So he's a very, very safe vice captain play. Now, I'll probably keep this captain one a bit short and sweet. Dave Fifita, for me, we saw what he did last week against a very, very good Rabbitohs pack. He absolutely made them look like under 12s. That tap and go where he bounced off like 10 guys, it was crazy, and scored that freak try. He's an amazing player, and he's a really strong captain candidate this week. Coming up against his old side, I really like when these guys come against their old teams and they really want to fire up for it. And this matchup between Fifita and Pangai Jr. is just going to be absolutely enticing. I can't wait to watch that. Broncos, they're shown that on the edge they're really susceptible in terms of their defense. Papali'i scored a try there last week. We saw Bryce Cartwright when he was playing on the edge scored over 100, and Fifita is in another category in terms of those guys, in terms of his SuperCoach points so far this season. So, I think Fifita is going to be probably the most highly captained player this round. I'll probably put in the big C on him. He is playing on Friday, so you could potentially put the vice captain on him. But for me, I think I'm just going to lock it in and hopefully enjoy another hat trick. I put Tevita Pangai Jr. here as a potential punty captain option, coming off another big game last week. And the Titans have been the 7th worst team at conceding to edge forwards too. So, against Fifita, he's probably going to be trying to do his best to kind of stop him as much as he can. So we might see the attacking points go down a little bit, but I think Pangai is a very punty, captain option if you don't have Fifita. But really, I think if you've got Fifita, he's probably the captain that you want to go for this week. So the next 5 I'll mention are probably all going to be a bit of if you're looking for more of a punty play. So Cam Munster, he got an 88 last week. He did get that force and dropout added to a score, which is it happened after lockout, so it was a bit of a shake up. Not something that I've seen before, but yeah, 88 points. You take that from your captain if you got that last week. The Sharks have actually been pretty good at defending against 5/8s. There's only been a few more teams that have been better at defending 5/8s. The 11th worst, if I put it that way. So Munster, he could have a good game, but really, I don't think too many people are going to be going there. But I just wanted to include him just to get a Storms player against the Sharks. Cleary, safe as houses. You saw last week he gets 96. He's averaging around 98. He's 100% the best halfback in SuperCoach. And against the Sea Eagles, again, they're middle of the table in terms of conceding points to halfbacks, but Cleary's far and away the best halfback, so you can probably lock him in for another safe 85 plus or 90 plus this game. Clint Gutherson and Reid Marnie, the 2 Eels guys I wanted to get in against the Bulldogs. Clint Gutherson against the Bulldogs, I think will have a really good game coming off that big 124. Bulldogs have been the 5th worst team at defending fullbacks, so I think Gutho is set for another good game where he hopefully gets around the 80 to 90 plus. Reid Marnie, so the Bulldogs have actually been the worst team at defending the hookers in terms of conceding points. He only scored 60 last week, which is probably a down game from him, but we've seen that he's definitely got that high upside in his game now this season. So we saw in the first round of the season he scored 130. I don't see any reason why he can't do another 100 plus game. So if you own Reid Marnie, that really could be a big pod captain play. And if I owned Reid Marnie, I'd probably would go vice captain Fifita and captain Reid Marnie. And finally, I've got Matt Duffy here against the Tigers, who have been the 3rd worst team at defending fullbacks. We saw through the middle, Tommy Trbojevic absolutely tore them apart. Not saying that Duffy's in the same class as Tom Trbojevic, but the Dragons forwards are pretty good. They've got a pretty decent pack. So I could see them doing similar damage through the middle. And with Duffy's support play, I think he could be on the end of a couple of tries. So I think he could be in for maybe a 90 plus game this week as well. But I don't think many people would be owning him firstly. And putting the captaincy on him is really punty, but bit of a fun pick. But I think your captain Fifita is going to be really safe this week. So I think the main guys here would be your Fifitas, your Clearys, and then your guys from the Eels, like your Clint Guthersons and your Reid Marnies. So with the final part of the video, I thought I'd just go again how I've done previously, just through every team's break evens, but I won't spend too much time, I think, on this particular section, as I've already done quite a bit already on some of these kind of key players this round. So with the Broncos, as I mentioned, TPJ or Haas, I think, as I said, for a more short to medium term play, I'd be going with TPJ. If you're looking purely just long term, I would be locking in Payne Haas. In terms of some of these other guys like your Jermaine Asarkos and things, I think if you held till this point, I think they're okay still to hold, given that their draw is actually pretty decent coming up, and they're playing in the round 13 bye week, so I still think they're okay to hold. But David Mead, who did actually get dropped this week, I think if you own him, he's definitely a sell. For the Bulldogs, I think really the only main guy that I would be considering is Luke Thompson, and I've kind of spoken about him already. And to be honest, I'm not really interested in, to be honest, anyone else at the Bulldogs at this stage. On the Cowboys, Ben Condon, as I mentioned, -8 break even, so I think he's still set for another big cash rise. So I wouldn't be trading Condon down to Josh Curran. Obviously, if he's the only candidate, then I guess you would do it. But if you can hold off, I think that's good because Condon still has more cash rises left in him. And Val Holmes, again, a break even of 14, so very low, and he's probably going to meet that. But I guess we're coming closer and closer to Origin, and the Cowboys won't play in that round 13 bye week, and Val Holmes is going to play Origin in my opinion, so there is a bit of a short-term risk in that he might not play that many games for you coming up, but I still think very decent pod play in your center wing. At the Dragons, I think Dufty is kind of, I've already spoken about, and Zach Lomax I think is probably really the only other main candidate. He's got a break even of 98. So I did flag that round 8, i.e. this week, was a good turning point in their draw, as we kind of discussed with Dufty. But a break even of 98, I think Lomax, he could be set to drop quite a bit more in cash. So I don't think he's really, I mean, if you can trade him in, that's fine if you don't really want to sell him. But if you're looking to maximize your kind of cash and your kind of share market way of playing the game in terms of picking him up as cheap as possible, I think you can hold off this week and maybe even wait until next week, or even the week after that would be the Storm. So it could be a couple of weeks where he's maybe priced around the mid 400s. That would be a good time to get him at that point. With the Eels, I think the main guys I've spoken about were already like Papali'i and Madison. I'll touch on Mike Acevo, who's got a minus 38 break even. He's very much your rocks and diamonds center wing. You know, he has these big games where he gets 156, but he also has these games where he can get you like 15. It happened to me last season and it does hurt. But I think he could be a good pod. He does play in round 13 bye week. So I think, you know, if you're looking purely for that to make numbers there, I think someone like Acevo could be an okay option. Junior Paulo. Now, I think he's got a super high break even of 90 and he hasn't shown the capability yet in the past few weeks of getting anywhere near that. You know, it looks like most of his runs are like decoy runs. He doesn't seem to be offloading as much. But to be honest, I think if I had Junior Paulo, I would just hold at this point. 467k, he's dropped so much in value. You're going to lose so much trading up or trading him out. So I think for Paulo, I would just hold on him and hope that he gets some attacking stats with their decent draw coming up. On the Knights side, Ponga, who I've already spoken about, and Watson to Simpkin. It's probably an okay move to do Watson to Simpkin, but I'm still undecided. And as I mentioned, I think I'm probably going to skip on that move in particular this week. And David Klemmer, again, he's 77 break even. He hasn't looked like he's going to get near that. It potentially looks like this knee issue is still troubling him. So I think 489k, he's dropped quite a bit. I would still hold him, similar to what I mentioned with Junior Paulo just then. And Bradman Best, who I was really impressed with last week, actually, he's got a break even of 94. So hopefully he goes down quite a bit in price over the next 2 weeks. And when that Knights draw really starts to turn, I think in round 10, you know, they're playing the round 13 bye week. I think he is an absolute trade-in target, you know, one of the top trade-in targets at that point in time. So in round 10, you'll hear me speaking about Bradman Best most likely. On the Panther side, Coruscant, I think, is the main inclusion for this week. He's got a high break even of 102, so definitely no need to rush him into your team and just would wait on him. And with Charlie Staines, I think, look, if you can sell him to like a Josh Curran or if you can upgrade him to a good center wing, I would 100% doing it. I would be doing it, but I think if it's, you know, if you've got other fires in your team, it's okay to hold him. He could just make up the numbers for round 13, but he's shown that he hasn't really got the capability to go big. It's only been the one game where he scored over 70, and he got that 85 or something. So I think, yeah, he hasn't really shown what we'd probably want to see from Staines. So yeah, for me, probably a sell, but he's not it's okay to hold him, I guess, as well. For the Rabbitohs, their draw coming up is pretty tough, but Cody Walker has actually typically, in my experience, done pretty well against the big clubs. So I think, you know, I would still be holding Cody Walker. I don't think there's any reason to be selling him. One thing I'd probably mention with them is Alex Johnson and Dan Gagai. You know, they've done pretty well in the past couple of weeks. I think Alex Johnson has had a very roller coaster few weeks. We scored like a 90 something last week, and the week before was like 17. The draw is tough, so I think he is obviously a lot more reliant on tries. So I think if you do own him, he might be a sell given that upcoming draw, but a 45 break even I think is okay to hold. And similar with Dan Gagai, who's got a break even of 71, he's probably got a little bit more base than Alex Johnson, so he's probably more likely to reach that 71. On the Raiders side, Ryan James, who looks like he's basically peaked in price, but he's got a break even of, let me just see it here, it's 36. So his minutes have been down the past couple of weeks, so he might not even reach the 36. He's been a bit of a disappointing trade-in of mine, actually. He's only made about 60k, and I was hoping for at least 100 out of him. That's generally the target that I like to see out of these cheapies. But I think for the time, I'll probably hold him. But with the Raiders forwards are so stacked that it's so hard to pick them. I saw Hudson Young has been named on the bench as well, so anyone who has Hudson Young, he's probably a sell at this point. I just hate the constant rotation of the forwards at the Raiders, so I just don't even want to go there in general. With the Roosters, I've kind of already spoken about Tedesco and Takiaho. Tupanua, who's got a break-even of 2, I mentioned last week, who could be a really, really sneaky pod, and he came up trumps with an 84, so I think he's still a very, very good trade-in target. You know, if you potentially can't get to Josh Curran, Sitili Tuponoa obviously is a lot more expensive, but he should still see some good cash rises in him. And playing off the back of Sam Walker definitely has that potential to get big attacking points. And as I mentioned, the Roosters draw coming up is not too bad either. With the Sea Eagles, I think Trbojevic, I've given all my thoughts on him, so I won't touch on him anymore. Same with Schuster. I guess the only other guy I might mention is Hamale Olakau'atu. Hopefully I pronounced that correct. -7 break even. He could be a decent trade-in target as well. And Ruben Garrick, -28 break even. He's already 522k though, so he's gone up quite a bit in price. But he's shown that with Tom Trbojevic back in the team, Garrick really has potential to get big points. With the Sharks, I think the only guy I'm really potentially looking at is maybe a Jesse Ramian. He's had a 3-round average of 74 with great base, so he potentially could be a good trade-in target, although they don't play in the round 13 bye week, so maybe it's more of a round 14 trade-in for him. And Sean Johnson, obviously super high break even, so hopefully he just drops in price and we can pick him up on the cheap after the round 13 bye period. With the Storm, Ryan Pappenhausen and Nico Hines have kind of already spoken about, and to be honest, they're probably the main two guys. Jerome Hughes has got a -36 break even. I think he is the next best performing halfback behind Nathan Cleary, but for me, not interested, and I don't see how I'm going to be breaking up that Sam Walker Nathan Cleary combination at halfback. On the Titans side, I think the centre wings are still very, very good trade-in targets. Corey Thompson is probably shot to number 1 of that list. I mentioned Brian Kelly was probably my preference, but the way that Corey Thompson has been playing, he tackle breaks for fun. He's just been racking up the SuperCoach points. I still think he's a very, very good trade-in target. Got a break-even of 57, and he's been averaging well above that. And he's 601k, so he is very, very expensive, but they all play in round 13 bye week, which is very, very important. So I still think that someone like Corey Thompson is a good trade-in target, even at that kind of higher price point. With the Warriors, I think the main trade-in targets obviously will be Josh Curran. Toru Harris is always going to be solid, and he is named this week, so I think no bad time to ever get him in. So if you can, would be fine to do that move, but I'm probably going to be doing it, I think, likely after round 13. And Reece Walsh, who looked really good in his first game, he's got a -17 break even, and he is a genuine cheapie, 173k. But the fullbacks, it's too stacked, I think, in my opinion, to go with him. Unfortunately, he will just have to be one that we just have to watch, but we can't get into our team, because I think you really have to be going with your premium fullbacks. That's where all the points is. West Tigers, Jake Simpkin, I've kind of given my thoughts on him already. Nofaluma I actually brought in last week, and he scored a 50 without a try, which I'm more okay with. I think Michael Cheekham's probably not the best centre to be playing next to him. He wasn't really able to give him the ball. Joey Leilua has been named at centre wing this week, so hopefully that means Nofaluma gets a little bit more ball and hopefully gets over for a try against the Dragons. So I definitely prefer him to Lomax at this point in time. Lomax, so I didn't actually mention with him previously, he might still potentially play Origin, where I don't think Nofaluma has a shot at getting into Origin team. Playing in the round 13 bye week, I think he's still a very good trade target, although his break even has gone up to 81, so I still think actually could wait a week. And Stefano or Tikamanu, I think if you can upgrade to a gun, I would be doing that move. But he plays in round 13 and probably hover around the 40s, so I think he won't really change in price too much, so he might just be able to make up the numbers at that point in time. Alright guys, that is the round 8 trade targets / round preview. Bit of a longer video for sure, so sorry for anyone who prefers those shorter videos, but I thought there's so much to talk about. I kind of wanted to get it all out in this one video, as I wasn't able to make that TLT and captains video, but would really appreciate any feedback on this, guys. Obviously it is a longer video, but I thought it covers everything well. Hopefully, in my own opinion, it does. So if you guys did like it, would really appreciate a thumbs up on the video. Do please consider subscribing to the channel if you haven't already, as I'll continue to put out more videos on this kind of content throughout the 2021 SuperCoach season. But until then, see you guys in the next video.